Uh, so last week we looked at a story, and let's take a look at that story again. Let me share that screen with you. Okay, can everyone see that screen?
Yes.
Okay, it's visible, it's big enough?
Yes.
Okay, good. So the story that we find at the end of chapter 15 is the story of what we call the Mekoshesh Eitzim. Up here, I'm sorry, it's over here. Right, the Mekoshesh Eitzim, which is translated as a gathering wood, or he's cutting wood, he's carrying wood, but it has something to do with engaging with wood on Shabbos, and wood is not only muktzah, but it's also, all these acts seem to be forbidden acts, okay? Although there's a difference between the act of cutting and sorting wood and the act of carrying wood, because we view the melacha of carrying on Shabbos, that act as of a slightly different nature than the other 9 categories of melacha, forbidden activity. Okay, so let's just read this text again. By Yubnei Yisrael Midbar, we're told at the end of chapter 15, and the children of Israel were in the wilderness. Vayimtzeu ish mekoshesh eitzim b'yom HaShabbat, and they found a man who was gathering wood on the Shabbos day. We spent a little time, the last thing we were learning together last week was Vayimtzeu ish, that actually pointed out that Moshe had set up Shabbos police, who were wandering around and making sure everyone was observing Shabbos, and they found this man who was not. And they brought him, the people that found him as he was gathering wood. El Moshe, El Aaron, El Kol Ha'edah. They brought him to Moshe and Aaron and to the whole assembly, which is a strange thing, right? Because you should bring him to the court, bring him to the judge. All right, Moshe. Maybe Aaron in there also, but why El Kol Ha'edah? To the whole assembly. I pointed out last week the story, the unfortunate story that was when Mayor de Blasio was giving his Sunday morning press conference, and the last call he took was from a Jewish reporter who called and said, you know, that there's a minyan that's still open in Borough Park. And the mayor asked him on live TV, I don't know how many millions of New Yorkers are watching, right? Where was this? Tell me the address. And he outed the shul in front of the entire assembly of the world for having their minyan. Now you'll say good gazuk, but that also can lead to unfortunate anti-Semitism. And he should have said, "How about you talk to my assistant offline?" But so was anyway. So they brought him before everybody. I will have you note that this is a theme in the parsha, because you remember when we talked about the spies, what would have been appropriate when the spies came back, having been sent by Moshe? Where should they have gone?
Moshe.
They should have gone, right, they should have gone to Moshe, but the Torah went out of its way to tell us that when the spies came back to deliver their report, they come to Moshe and Aaron and the entire assembly. So there's an interesting paralleling that's happening to some degree. In certain ways, and we'll see this theme in a second, I think. There's going to be a message here. So maybe not a second, a little bit later we'll capture the message. So they brought him to Moshe, and then the Torah says, "Vayinuchu oto b'mishmar," and they put him in jail, in the lockup. Ki lo porash ma ye'asa lo, because it wasn't explicitly laid out what should be done with him. That's a strange thing, because the Torah does say what should be done with someone who breaks Shabbos. What should be done with someone who transgresses Shabbos in the Torah? Well, he's put to death. He is put to death. We lost Bennett. I'll try Bennett again.
No, I'm back.
Oh, okay. Now you're working. Good. Okay. So it's a strange. What wasn't explicit, but maybe the manner of death. We'll see that. And God said to Moshe, the man shall surely die. The entire assembly should stone him to death outside the camp. And that's what happened. It's 3 times now, the whole assembly, they bring him outside the camp Vayigimu oto ba'avanim bayamot, and they kill him. They stone him to death. Kasher tiva Adonai et Moshe, as God had commanded Moshe. It's a very disturbing story in a lot of ways. Firstly, I think we're all smart at the fact that Torah does have a death penalty for Shabbos desecration, and the story itself is just weird. We want to know why. When is this happening? So our work last week was around this phrase, Vayihiyu b'nei Yisrael ba'midbar, right? And the children of Israel were in the wilderness. And the approach that we started with last week was a suggestion that the midbar here, we saw it as the Ibn Ezra's rendering. It's not the midbar, the wilderness that where the Israelites actually are. He says it's the midbar Sinai. And to clarify just quickly, just to review that, the Sinai Peninsula is a very big, wide place, and is made up of a number of wildernesses. So we call it the Sinai Peninsula because one of the main wildernesses there is Midbar Sinai, but we know lots of other Midbarim that the Jews went through. They went when they left Egypt, they crossed, and they were in Midbar Shur, and later on they arrive at Sinai, in Midbar Sinai, and then they leave Sinai. They head up towards Israel, and they're marching towards Israel. They eventually make their way to Midbar Paran. Midbar Paran is pretty much like right there at the border between the desert and the Negev, northern Sinai, as we would refer to it now. That's where the Israelites were, maybe actually already in what we call the Negev now, and that's where they launched the spies, right? That's where they launched the spies. And the last event that took place, which is when the follow-up to the spy story, let's go back up there for a second. Pardon, don't get dizzy, don't be dizzy. Right? The Israelites try to, after God decrees, I hate when that happens. Hold on a second. When God decrees upon them that they're that they have to spend 40 years in the desert, the group says, we're going anyway. We're going to go. No, we're going to Israel. And they try to go. And then the Canaanites come down from the mountains, right? And the Canaanites come down from the mountains and they attack them. So all that happens when they're in the northern Sinai. So the Ibn Ezra says, our story happens so again, this is in Midbar Paran. Our story happens in the Midbar Sinai. So when were they in the Midbar Sinai? They were in the Sinai wilderness when?
Shortly after leaving Egypt.
Shortly after leaving Egypt. They arrive at the Sinai, at Midbar Sinai, at the beginning of the month of Sivan. The beginning of the month of Sivan, which was a year before, okay, 11 months before. And that's where they stayed and they got the Torah at Mount Sinai. They stayed there for a long time, and they march out in ER, right where we are, right in the calendar year, we find ourselves. In ER, they march north. So says the Ibn Ezra, this happens earlier. And we spent time last week looking at the stories that we have about Shabbos that appear in Bishalach. One of them has to do with the giving of the man. The manna falls from heaven, and the Torah actually describes that some Israelites went out on Shabbos morning and they tried to gather man. They try to gather man, but can they gather man?
No.
Why? On Shabbos morning? There is no man on Shabbos morning because God takes a break from that. He gave a double portion on Friday. Moshe is very angry at them and yells at them and says, this is what Hashem said. This is a holy Shabbos. What's the matter with you people? And so, in effect, the Ibn Ezra says this story connects to that one. In the Midrash's view, let's take a look at that Midrash now. Let's stop sharing this one. We'll look at the Midrash. Hello, everybody again.
Rabbi, these two stories are before the receipt of the Torah or after?
That would be even before the receiving of the Torah. They did have, so the Moshe is teaching them about Shabbos, like a hands-on learning about Shabbos, and before they actually had the mitzvah from the Torah of remember the Shabbos day to keep it holy. And so it's possible this story happens right then. Right then. Excuse me 1 second, folks. I just have this might be an emergency call. I'm going to put you on mute for a moment here. So I'm sorry. Excuse me 1 second.
Hello, Gerald.
Hello, Stephen. How are you?
I'm okay.
I'm glad you told me about this lecture.
Let's see. Doug, how are you doing?
Doing really pretty fine. I'm doing okay.
That's very hesitant.
Yeah, it is. There's a lot going on. So
I'm so happy to say that was someone who I was fearful would have troubling news, but it was not troubling news. So that's great. Okay.
Good.
So let's just so the Midrash says. Let's take a look at this Midrash now.
Oh.
The Midrash says that scripture here. Anybody who wants to read this text for us? Somebody want to read it? Highlighted it. Jerry, can you see it?
Yes, I believe I can.
Okay. Do you want to read it? And the children of Israel.
And the children of Israel were in the desert, etc. Scripture here speaks in disparagement of Israel, that they had observed only the first Shabbat when they desecrated the second, and they found a man
The Koshesh.
wood on the Sabbath day.
So according to this Midrash, this story happens on the second Shabbos of Shabbos observance. Okay? The second week of Shabbos observance.
I have a question.
I mentioned last week there was a Midrashic tradition that said if only Israel had kept 2 Shabbatot in a row, 2 Shabboses, then the redemption would have happened.
Question.
Which means that Midrashic tradition says this schnook blew it for all the Jewish people forever, or until redemption will finally happen, because the first Shabbos they finally kept. I mean, some of them tried not to keep it, but they didn't have a chance to break Shabbos because there was no manna to actually sin with by bringing in. The next Shabbos, he goes out, and there isn't any manna, but there is a stick. So he takes a stick and blows Shabbos and ruins it for everybody. So it's a fascinating Midrashic tradition. Do they know that? Do they not know that? But that makes it an intense thing, right? Moshe freaks out the first Shabbos just because they try to break it. And the next Shabbos, somebody really does. And so this guy is just terrible, right? For in that sense. We ask the question, as you always have, and this is the end of our review, which is, if a story so Ibn Ezra says the story appears here in Bamidbar, but it really took place back in Shemos, and there are connections that you can make for why that you can prove that language might bring you there. Then you have to answer which question? If this happened earlier, then what?
The giving of the Torah.
You're right. So then you have to answer a question about the order of the Torah. Why does it appear here? Tell it to us back then. Why tell it to us here? And the answer to that seems to turn on this phrase. I'm sorry, we're just kind of stuck with going back and forth with screen share, but that's all we're going to do. On this phrase in the Torah that says the last thing that appears before the story, after discussing people who transgress unwittingly and bringing sacrifices, the Torah then says, Behanefesh, everybody see me here in verse 30. Behanefesh asher taseh biyad ramah. If there's someone who transgresses in a high-handed way, literally, yad ramah, high-handed, translated here is defiantly, min hazrach min hager, whether he's a citizen or a stranger, et Adonai hu megadef, this person is blaspheming God, this person should be cut off from his people. Ki devar Adonai bazah, because he has disparaged and made little of God's word. That mitzvato hefar, and he has totally blown his mitzvot. This person should be cut off. So Ibn Ezra would say here that what? The Torah then follows with a story about. Tell me what?
The man with the wood.
A man who has defiantly, stuck it in the eye of God by ignoring God's word and disparaging it in a defiant way, disregarding God. Okay, That's what this comes then as an example of the halacha that appears beforehand. Okay?
But there are two ways. One says he shall be cut off. The other says he shall be killed. Cut off doesn't mean necessarily killed.
It doesn't say he shall be killed in the principle.
Correct.
And that's exactly then what the Torah would seem to mean when here you have a man who was gathering wood. And so forget the rules of Shabbos for the moment. We see this guy basically as a defiant schnook who is blaspheming God. And they say, what do we do with him? God said he should be cut off, but how does that manifest? And so maybe you would say, God says, I'll tell you how to cut him off. Throw stones at him, right? So that would be kind of the way you would read this story. So that that sort of ends theme number 1 in reading it. Anybody see that, right? This is a story that happens earlier. It's an example of God, of defiance of God. And it's brought here because the previous halacha happened to have talked about defiant people. Okay? But go ahead.
Well,
if God had already told Moses what these things should be about, when this wrong takes place, wouldn't it make sense that the wrongdoer comes before, the whole congregation and Moses, and they're the ones who make the decision that he shall be stoned? Instead, here it reads that the Lord commanded that he be stoned. So the Lord is involving himself in a direct individual violation?
Yes, God is telling you, this is what you do with someone who sticks it in my eye. This is what you're going to do, right? Because Moses said, tell us, oh Lord, we don't carry out any death penalty or any other penalties without you defining what the penalties are, because the law is a heavenly law. We don't know what the penalty should be, so you tell us what to do. Mimi, you had a question.
It's more of a statement that this is really awful because, this is supposedly the parents of Benot Tzlofchad.
No. Don't tell me Midrash. We'll get there eventually. Right now, he is in this rendering, he is a terrible man who has biyad Ramah defied God. We'll come back to your reference a little bit later. So would you mind? Hold on to it.
Rabbi, a question?
No, hold
sorry.
on. Let me, maybe you give me permission to hold off on that reference?
Yeah, I'm leaving off on it, but I'm coming back to this reference as to that. I thought that, I don't know if it's the same midrash or not, but I thought that here he's being used as that he did it intentionally, and that he did it as a reference not to.
So I understand, but right now we're dealing with the first approach, which says this is a Yad Ramah example. Yad Ramah means a person does it in an open defiance of God. And that's why it's here. We'll see another approach in a few moments, okay? But right now, that's the most extreme reading of this guy.
I have a basic question.
No, Stephen had a question first. Go ahead, Stephen.
Rabbi, how does this interfere, or how do you accept God giving us free will, and then God presuming, because an act was committed on Shabbos, that it's not just an expression of free will, or the person just forgot that it was Shabbos?
Okay, it's very important, actually. So free will is a general point, and God says you have free will to ignore me, and then I have free will to punish you for that. But right, in this case, though, it's very clear. The Midrash makes very clear that the Torah seems to repeat this phrase: "The people who found him, breaking, and it repeats it twice. Found him, gathering the sticks. He did it." And he was doing it, and then two people found him, because you need 2 people witnessing, and they say to him, "Sir, please, you must stop doing that. This is an act which is punishable by death or whatever, right? Don't you understand that this is a terrible prohibition of breaking the Shabbos?" And the person then says to you, "Go to hell. I don't care." Right? So that is the only time that halachically you can actually punish someone with the Torah's punishments. It's a really very important, a very liberal position halachically, that no one is ever put to death unless they have been warned as they're about to carry out the prohibition that brings death, and this person says, "I understand, I'm doing it anyway." So that's how this is framed, which makes him even more defiant then, right? In the extreme. So let's pick it up. The whole other approach says, no. The Torah says, and the children of Israel were in the Midbar. Why would you say Ibn Ezra that means, well, we're talking about in the Midbar Sinai from a story a year ago? Why don't you just accept it? Here they are in the Midbar. And that's how Ramban, for example, reads it. So, Dennis, you want to read that Ramban?
And attached to the section, the Torah linked after it the issue of the Mekoshe, because this took place in that time following the spies by way of the Pshat. And that is the meaning of, and the children of Israel were in the wilderness, because in their extended time, they're under the decree, this even took place.
I'm sorry, this event. Sorry about that. This event.
Right.
Right. So the Ramban and others also make it very clear that in the Bechor Shor, just as it was decreed by that they should not enter the land, in the midst of the situation that they were there in the wilderness, and then found a man Mekoshesh. This story happens here now, exactly where you find it. The strength of the statement, of course, is right. It appears in Bamidbar, and it's happening in Bamidbar, and everything makes sense. Okay, so then you have to say, well, then what's the connection to this? Is there a point to this story happening right now? So let's take a look at some approaches to this too. Here, let's read this Rabbeinu Bachaya. Rick, you want to read it?
While the children of Israel were in the desert, we already know that the episode of the spies, as well as the uprising of Korach, and the incident of the person who gathered kindling on the Shabbat occurred in the desert. Why?
See it?
Why then?
Why then the Torah have to preface this paragraph with the words, quote, "The children of Israel were in the desert," end quote.
Just say, and a man was found gathering wood. Why tell us, and the children of Israel were in the Midbar? Is that such a strong question? Let's look back. Let's just look at the language one more time and see whether we're really convinced that's a problem. So I don't know. Let's just think. A story happens. We have a real story. There's narrative here. Chapter 14. Chapter 14, the whole spy story, and then the aftermath of the spy story with the people trying to go up the mountain, right? And they are beaten. Narrative. Chapter 15 begins with, like, suddenly narrative disappears. When you come to Israel, you bring this, you bring that, and then we'll come back. We will return to this in a second, right? The rules of libations, and the rules of bringing challah, and then some other sacrifices, right? And then at the end of the chapter, and then rules of people who sin on purpose, not on purpose. The end of the chapter, and the children of Israel in the wilderness, and they found a man, right, gathering. What would be the simplest read about what the purpose of saying the children of Israel were in the wilderness? I took a break from talking about narrative to talk about some halachas, some laws. I finished my little break. Let me bring you back to our story. So the way I do that is by saying the children of Israel in the wilderness. It kind of makes a lot of sense. So I want you to capture two things here. What is the gist of God's decree at the end of chapter 14? After the spies come back and the Israelites fall for their story. What does God say? How long? Here we go, right? How long will this evil assembly? I have to deal with them, the people who are muttering against me. I've heard their mutterings, right? By my life, just as they said, Bamidbar, they're going to get what they asked for. Bamidbar hazeh yiplu pikrechem. Their carcasses are going to fall and die in this wilderness, right? You're not going to go into the land. Imatem tavo la'aretz, it's not going to happen. Ufigrechem atem yiplu b'midbar hazeh, and your carcasses are going to fall in this wilderness. Uvenechem yuroim b'midbar arba'im shana. Your children are going to have to wander around the wilderness for 40 years, right? Until your carcasses give out here in the wilderness. Midbar, 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 midbar. That's what this is all about, right? That they have been condemned to the wilderness. And so now we meet what it means to be in the wilderness. They're kind of trapped here. And so here's our first story that happens in the wilderness. Okay? Capture that? Now, having said that, we're going to see a few different approaches. Does anybody have any questions on that? Comments?
Before this
Trying to read the
story,
room.
however, Rabbi, before this story, the emphasis is on treating the stranger the same as an Israelite.
Yes, that is a theme here.
Right, and then this follows immediately. So could this be the man who was getting the wood on the Sabbath was not an Israelite, but was rather...
Wow. So I actually want you to hold on to that for a few more minutes because that's going to be an interesting little parallel question for a moment. But let's keep that in the back of your mind because there is a story that I want us to remind ourselves of. Here, I want you to pick up what it is that happens in between. All right, make sure go back to the text, actually. One more time. Back to the Chumash text. Back and forth and back and forth. Yeah. So this is what happens. Just after, at the point, like we have a halachic, tangent that happens, and the answer is it isn't a tangent at all. God has said, you're going to rot in the wilderness. Chapter 15 begins. Vaydaber Adonai Moshe lemor. God spoke to Moshe. Daber b'nei Yisrael v'mar talehem. And God, speak to the children of Israel and say to them, Ki tavo el eretz moshvotechem. When you come to the land of your sojourning habitations, which I'm going to give to you, and you're going to bring a sacrifice, and it talks about libations, special libations. And then that discussion ends about some of the sacrifices, specifically framed in the framing that we just read. Next discussion. Vaydaber Adonai Moshe lemor. And God said to Moshe, saying, Daber b'nei Yisrael, tell the children of Israel, v'mar talehem, say to them, B'voachem el haaretz asher ani mevi etchem shama. When you come into the land where I'm going to bring you, and you should go, when you're going to eat your bread, you have to take challah, right? Taking challah, we mentioned last week, right? The mitzvah of removing a portion of your dough and giving it to the Kohen. So that is discussed here. Why is this here? Why is this here? And the answer seems to relate. What do you think, folks? Why is this here? What is the Torah stressing? In contrast to chapter 14. Who's got it? Someone's got to read it. It's got to see it. Chapter 14, the second half was all about what? You will all
die in the
wilderness.
You will all die in the wilderness. And that's the end. Wilderness is everything. And chapter 15 begins by saying mitzvos that apply specifically when
You went to the land of Israel.
you enter the land of Israel. So tell me what's going on.
Why
What-
would
what-
he? Why would they? Why would he say that if all those people are not going to enter the land of Israel?
Good. So why don't you folks answer?
I don't know.
It's for them to teach the next generation.
For them to teach the next generation.
Oh,
You think it's all for fallen. And in certain ways it is for fallen. Sorry, that Yiddish phrase, right? It's all get, gone, finished, done, right? Over. But it's not over. Who's it over for?
it's
Only
only
the-
over for the adults.
It's over for the generation of people 20 to 60, right? You, unfortunately, right, you're gone. I mean, you're not going to enter Israel. But I want to make it very, very, very clear, having said 5 times about your carcasses and over and over again, right? You're going to rot and die in the desert, right? I want you to know, though, I want your children to hear there's going to be an entry to the land of Israel, right? It's going to be an entry. Jason, you're raising your hand. Go ahead.
Another way of seeing it is actually their bodies being buried in the land of Israel.
Oh, they're going to have a chance to be right. The rest, your parents or the adults are going to all, rot in the wilderness without having kavura, but you'll be buried there. Nice. Okay. So, but God, in effect, is saying, I want to make it clear. I'm not just here to tell you it's all over. I'm just telling you it's all delayed, and the children, the next generation, will go into Israel. And
But
then
also-
having spent, go ahead.
Sorry, but also, for those who violate Shabbat in the land of Israel will be stoned or will die. So
If
it's
you
not
break
just
Shabbos in
you.
Israel, yes, but yes, it's true. Actually, hold on to that for a second. I want you to actually see a distinction that will come up. So keep that thought in your head. Doug, we're going to say?
I was curious, sometimes there are rules, but there are situational rules.
Yes.
Would the rules be stricter in a time when you're trying to really get people in line? And do you follow them all the time? So is carrying wood in the midbar or anything that would have varied been tougher on the young to say, hey, we really need to make everyone understand the severity of what we do, but maybe in another time it wouldn't be so serious.
That's interesting. So I think we actually looked a little bit last week when we made the story a little earlier that this was like a critical moment that they were afraid that everything would unravel, right? Because one week, one guy's texting on Shabbos, right? One kid is texting to one friend in school on Shabbos, and the week after, they're all texting, right? So we got to make an example situation, right? So this becomes an example situation, maybe here too. And we will hold on to that. It might relate to what Mimi's talking about from a different angle also. But in the moment, what you have is the following, right? The Torah says you're all going to rot, and God says you all die in the wilderness. But I want you to know, Kinderlach, chapter 15, you're going to come to Israel, hear a bunch of halachos about it's hopeful, this and that. Okay, I finished my hope. Let's get back to the wilderness. And the next thing you know, some schnook is breaking Shabbos. That's kind of how you divide it up, right? That's sort of approach number 2 to this. And we'll see how to play with this a little bit. Let's look at the Ibn Ezra. Who wants to read the Ibn Ezra for us? Mimi, can you see it?
I can't. I'm on that's on the phone. I can't see it.
Okay. Hedda,
Well,
can
I
you
can
see
read
it? Oh, Wendy, go ahead.
When you will enter the land of your habitations,
Oh, sorry.
this chapter is linked to the story of their having become weak of spirit and mourning over the 40-year decree in the wilderness in order to comfort the children and to inform them that they would enter the land.
Right. So he offers the second approach that we find here, right? There's another angle here, which will, and then you're back to reality. So here I want to take you to the Bechor Shor. Hold a second. It might be a little bit in line with maybe what Doug was saying. Doug, can you see this? You want to read this, the Bechor Shor highlighted? Another reason? Doug, you there?
Another reason for
I
right.
am.
All right, Willa's reading.
Go ahead, Willa.
Go ahead, Willa.
Another reason for writing in the wilderness with regard to the prior mitzvot of libation and challah, it is written when you enter the land on your entry to the land, but Shabbat applies whether in the land or outside the land, even in the wilderness.
So we have a few examples of halachas that apply specifically in Israel, and then something which applies everywhere, which, by the way, is true, right? Our mitzvah of taking challah when you bake a large amount of dough and make bread it might only apply as a Torah obligation in Israel, but outside of Israel it might be a Torah obligation. Okay, so those are a bunch of slightly different angles on it. Here, though, is sort of this other contrast, which is the scandal of it all. Let's read this last piece. Rabbeinu Bachaya kind of takes us away from the context of the midbar in terms of the condemnation.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know you can hear me.
Willa, we did hear you. We can't see you, but we can hear you.
I
Hedda,
don't know I can't see me either, but I can.
We'll work on your screen another time. Hedda, can you read us the Rabbeinu Bachaya? Hedda, can you read that?
According to the plain meaning of the text, These words could be meant to underline the seriousness of the sin of the people who had gathered the kindling. While the people were in the desert, they experienced miracles daily, such as the descent of the manna, the protective layer of the cloud, etc. Miracles which testified to the fact that God the world time and therefore was able to ignore the laws of nature. This man, in defiance of such knowledge, violated the Sabbath, which is meant to testify to our belief in God's being eternal, predating the existence of any physical universe.
All right, so that's kind of, in effect, brings us back to that first world of explanation. So let's go back now to this question of the second half, which is the penalty and the fact that he is put in the mishmar. I've joked around about mishmar before. The only other time we find the mishmar in the Torah is actually Yosef is referred to as been put in the mishmar. Literally, what's the root you find of the word mishmar? Like mem shin mem resh. What would be the root of that word?
Shomer.
Shomer, right? Which means what?
Guarding.
Mishmar means means under the lockup, right? When you're locked up, you're under guard. So you're being guarded there. For some reason in yeshiva, Thursday night when you stayed up late learning Torah was always referred to as mishmar, and I used to always joke that it felt like we were all being locked up and losing our freedom because of in that mishmar. But that's the word we have here, okay? So the Torah says it was not explained, ki lo porash, it was not explicit what should happen to him. So this is how the Sifrei reads that. We already noted some of the strangeness of this, but here's the Sifrei. Stephen, can you read it?
Just have to make it better. But is it not written, Shmot, he who profanes it shall be put to death? What
meaning that we know the punishment for transgressing Shabbos. I think Jerry made that point already. We know the punishment for transgressing Shabbos. What wasn't clear?
For it was not made clear. He did not know with what specific type of death until he was told to him by the Holy One. And the Lord said to Moses, shall die the man. And this is the judgment for all generations, and not just in this particular incident.
Okay, so that there are actually four different modes of divine punishment. David, can you let's hold a second. Let me just do this for a second.
David, can you mute?
Okay, if I have to do it, I'll do it. Hold on a second. Okay. So the four divine punishments, different types of death penalties, so they didn't know which one to give him. That's how the Midrash reads it. They didn't know which death penalty. The second thing to clarify the Midrash says is when it says, the Torah says, everyone, the whole Eidah will stone him. So the Sifrei clarifies. Dan, can you read this? Dan, you with us? You want to read the other Sifrei I highlighted?
Where it says, and the Lord said to Moses, die.
Yes. Shall die the man.
This is the judgment for all the generations and not just this particular instance.
Okay.
Stone him with stones in this particular instance. The entire congregation, in the presence of the entire congregation. You say this, but perhaps it is to be understood literally, i.e. that the entire congregation is to stone him. It is therefore written, the
next column.
The witnesses shall be against him, first to put him to death. How then am I to understand the entire congregation as in the presence of the entire congregation?
Okay, so the Midrash says that it's not one of those situations. I don't know what was the what was that awful British series where they carried out a lot of the medieval. It was half
Monty
joking.
Python?
Monty Python, right? So
Oh,
you're
that was
you're not having this medieval situation where thousands of people are throwing stones at him or anything. All right, who stones him?
The congregation.
No,
Hashem.
the hand of Hashem doesn't
The
throw stones.
witnesses.
The hand of the witnesses, right? The witnesses are the ones who carry out the punishment, and the entire congregation means that it's in the presence of the entire congregation, right? This is a public execution, but not that everybody does this. Okay, a lot of this here is reminiscent of another story, and let's quickly get back there. We have a few. It's 8:23. Right? Let's go there really quickly. Anybody think of another version of this story that might come to mind that was familiar to us?
About an errant child to be stoned.
Okay, that's good. Errant child. That's one example. Yes, I was thinking of a different story. There was actually a story in the text. We learned it around a year ago.
Leviticus.
Yeah. I'm looking for. I'm actually in the wrong spot. Hold on a second. Give me a second. Mimi, you're speaking. Go ahead.
No, I was thinking of Judah and Tamar, but that doesn't really fit. Where they're gonna
Right. So let's read the story. We're going to read the story, and you'll see right away. Torah finished talking about the showbread that happens every week. Week to week, they bring a special bread that will be put before the ark. And then the Torah says, remember the story? And a son of an Israelite woman who was also the son of an Egyptian man went out, and he starts fighting with an Israelite person who was, and then he curses and blasphemes God. We meet his name. His name is very clearly spelled out. You know exactly who his mother is. And they put him by Yenuchuhu Bamishpar, and they put him in the jail, in the lockup. Lifrosh lahem al pi Adonai, that it should be explained to them by God. Sounds a lot like what we read here, right? And they put him into the Mishmar, ki lo porash, because it wasn't explained what should happen to him. And the same thing, the same verb is being used earlier, that God should lifrosh, should say what happens. And God says, God issues a decree. Bring out the blasphemer out to the camp, and everyone who heard him will put their hands on him. And they ragnu oto kol aida, and everyone will stone him. And that's what happens to him. These two stories are they're structured to have you think about one another. I wouldn't say they're the same story, but the Torah wants you to be thinking about both stories, right? You can't help but know the Torah wants to send you from one to the other. Again, our language. Right, the same thing. People have found brought him right, the whole Eidah, and God put him in the Mishmar, put him to death, the whole Eidah. So there is something unusual, though, and here we'll end with this point, that when it came to the first story, which happened earlier, of the blasphemer, where's the focus of the story? On the people or on him?
On the blasphemer.
On the blasphemer, correct, right? We know exactly every step of the way. He gets in a fight with this guy, then he curses God, and then he's brought in, and the Torah wants you to know his identity. They tell you his identity. And the only way they tell you his identity is by giving you his Jewish part of it. His mother was Shlomit Bat Divri. You remember the story actually suggests that he's the son of the Egyptian man whom Moshe killed, right? And right, fascinating connections, right? And then we focus on him all the way through. Our story, where's the Torah's attention? The children of Israel were in the wilderness, and they found a man who was gathering stones. And they brought him, the people who found him, to Moshe and Aaron. They put him in jail, and then God says what to do with him, and everybody goes out and ultimately they kill him. The Torah focuses more on the finders of this man than on the man. You see that? Twice. Vayim suish, vayikribi oto hamotzi moto. He's just a piece of a story which isn't really about him. This is something I read in a Torah article by Rabbanit Sharon Rimon, who says the Torah here is not interested in him. The Torah here is interested in the children of Israel. And the Torah is telling you the following story. The Israelites had all said, we don't want to listen to God. We don't want to go into Israel. We're afraid to go in, and we're not going to listen. And then God says, fine, you're going to rot to death in the Midbar. You had a few people who said, no, we want to show how much we care about God. We're going to go to Israel. And Moses said, don't defy God as you're trying to listen to God. Right? It's too late. God says, don't go to Israel. You're still going to Israel. You're defying him in the very same moment. The next story is about people who want to show their faith in God by being committed to the Torah and to God's word, not by defying him a second time over. And that's then a statement about, don't think that the Israelites, at the end of the story of the spies, are all terrible people, which is the way we might view it. They're all horrible, and they deserve to write. No, God made a decree; it's going to be what happens to them. But there are people who are committed to Him, and they want to show you how they're committed to Him, and that's what this story becomes about, and partially about the overeager almost nature of this of the people of Israel. Next week, we're going to finish up this discussion, and we're going to get back to something that Mimi started to bring up, which is there an identity to this man? I've now made it in extremis the case that this man's identity doesn't matter. It's really about the Israelites, but the story might very well be about a specific man, and then we'll kind of reread the whole story once more. So if you'll stay with me and join us the next week at 7:40, the third and final part of our series, we'll complete the analysis of what we have here. Sound good, everyone?
Sounds good.
Question, Rabbi?
Okay. Take care, everyone.
Question, Rabbi?
Yeah.
Rabbi?
Go ahead.
Why